Okay, the quadratic formula is what we're going to talk about now. So the quadratic formula works when it will actually give us the x values for any quadratic equation. It will solve it for us. So remember we learned two other ways of solving. In 8-1, we learned, what did we learn how to solve? Solve by factoring. And then in just the last section, 8-3, we learned solve by square root method. Now, those two methods only work for certain equations, and the quadratic formula is going to work for all equations. And I would also say that if you go on YouTube and you search for quadratic formula, you'll see a lot of kids singing different songs to memorize it. One such way to remember it is using the Pop Goes the Weasel song. So it goes, x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that's one way to memorize it. You can find others. But how does this work? So if we want to use the quadratic formula, we take an equation, we need to find the coefficients. So we're looking for a, b, and c. So who can tell me what a is equal to? And what is b equal to? And what is c equal to? And don't forget to take that negative with it, okay? That's going to be important. We're going to use the quadratic formula to solve and simplify as much as possible. So we have x equals negative b. So here is b. Anytime I see b, I'm going to plug in 5, but I put the negative first. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root b squared, so that's going to be 25, minus 4 times a is 3, times c is negative 4, all over 2 times a, which is 3. So we're plugging those numbers in, and then we're going to go ahead and simplify. I usually go ahead and square b just because I find that easier. It saves me a little bit of a step there. So now, negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25, and then let's simplify this. So that's going to be negative, and a negative gives us a positive. So if there's two negatives here, well, this one is always in the formula. And then there's another negative. Then we'll have a negative times a negative is a positive. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 4 is 48. All over 6. Okay, keep going. So here we have negative 5 plus or minus the square root. 25 plus 48 is 73, all over 6. Now we would want to ask ourselves, when it says simplify as much as possible, they're talking about getting all of the operations done, but they're also talking about simplifying the radical. So 73, since 73 is prime, it's not going to simplify anymore. There's no perfect square locked inside. Okay, so that's our answer right there. And realize that the solution is two different numbers, negative 5 plus radical 73 over 6, and negative 5 minus radical 73 over 6. So those are our two solutions. Now to check it, the best thing to really do if you were going to check is to come up with the decimal approximation. Because can you imagine putting this whole thing in for x squared? So to do the decimal approximation, I would need a lot of parentheses here. But if I wanted to know approximately what those values are, I would start out with negative 5 plus square root of 73. And then I'm just going to push enter, then divide by 6, because I'll show you how to do it in one step. My calculator is not simplifying it using decimals, so if I push S to D on here, it will give me the decimal approximate. So that one that I just plugged in here, this is approximately 0.59. The other one, if I want to put the whole thing in at once, I'm going to need parentheses, negative 5 minus the square root of 73 close that parenthesis, actually come out, we need to come out of the radical. So come out of the radical, then close the parentheses, then divide by 6. So that way, that whole thing is grouped, okay? And again, I'm going to put SD. So we get, for this one, is approximately negative 2.26, if I round to 2 decimal places. To plug that in, if I want to do my check now, I would need to plug this number in to my whole entire equation, okay? So to plug it in, I'm going to do 3 times, and most calculators have this button, ANS. That will take your last answer. So 3 times the answer squared plus 5 times that answer minus 4, and that should give us 0. And it does. So that's a way that we can use the calculator button and the ANS to check. Yes, you had a question. So the approximates come up when it's a word problem because like this is our answer and that means very little to us. Most of the time we want to be able to simplify this as much as possible. The only reason why I'm doing the decimal approximates is so that I can use that to plug it in to use my calculator to do the check, essentially. Oh, because I rounded to different places last time. I see what you're saying. Yeah. No, because unless it specifies round, it will always say in a question if you have to round to the 10th, round to the 100th. So that's a good question about rounding. When I did this problem in a previous example, I had rounded to do a different decimal place. So this is rounded right now to the hundredths. So I will say that if it says simplify as much as possible, this is your solution. If it wants a rounded answer, it's usually when it comes to a word problem, and we'll say round to the nearest 10th, round to the nearest 100th. So 10th would be 1 decimal place, 100th would be 2. Okay? Yes. Well, I mean, the whole point... Yeah, the whole point is really just to be able to check to see if it's right. So let's after this we'll go back and we can try that, okay, on your calculator. Okay, example. For this quadratic equation, what are the values of A, B, and C? So let's identify A equals, B equals, good, -2, C equals, excellent. And so now we're going to do the quadratic formula. And what I suggest is every time you find some way to memorize it, you might write it down. Okay, x equals -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, and the reason why I make that emphasis about the all over is a lot of people's fraction bar will start to shrink. And it will stop being the whole thing all over. So that's why that's important. So now we're just going to go ahead and plug in all those values for the variables. So -2 plus or minus the square root b squared. This b, when you square a negative, you're always going to get a positive. So you might as well just square that number right away. That's going to be 4. That's because -2 squared is positive 4. Minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times 8. Good. Now we line up our equal sign. And we're going to do the next step. What's -2? We're going to simplify. -2 is positive 2. Plus or minus the square root 4. You see these two negatives? Negative, that's going to be a positive plus. You have 4 times 8 times 1 is 32. Divided by 16. Okay, we continue on. Simplifying. 2 plus or minus the square root of 36 over 16. And when we take the square root of 36, we get what? 6. And that plus or minus is already in there. So we have 2 plus 6 divided by 16, and we have 2 minus 6 divided by 16. So here we get 8 over 16, which reduces down to 1/2, right? And here we get negative 4 over 16, which reduces down to 1/4. Yes, and those are our solutions, 1/2 and negative 1/4. Now, of course, we can, plug those numbers in. These are our solutions. That's why we put them in set notation. I'm just going to show you one more time. Do you want to pass me your calculator? And I'll show you on your calculator how I can plug in that fraction. Okay, so I'm just going to show you because the negative one is a little bit more complicated, but of course you want to check both. So just to use the calculator here, I'm going to have 8 parentheses. I have to use this negative sign, not subtract. Negative 1 divided by 4, close parentheses, square. Okay, I'm just plugging it in here, right? Minus 2 times negative 1 divided by 4 minus 1. When I push enter, what number do you expect to come up if I've done it right? 0. Okay, 0. All right? Okay. Oh, okay. Yes. SD on that calculator is the double arrows. Okay, solve the quadratic equation below using the quadratic formula. So here, remember that we need it in standard form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So we always need, our first step always needs to be to set it equal to 0. Good. So I'm going to say we should always try and keep x squared positive. So we're going to add 2x and add 3 to both sides. Add 2x, add 3. So we get x squared plus 2x plus 3 equals 0. Now tell me what's A, what's B, and what's C. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3. Good. So now we're going to have our formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared. I should probably write 2 squared here, but anyway, that's 4. 2 squared is 4. Minus 4 times a, which is 1, c, which is 3, all over 2 times 1. Okay? So we continue on simplifying. Negative 2 plus or minus the square root 4 minus 12 over 2 equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 over 2, correct? Did I do that right? Yes, because of the negative 8, this would be a does not exist. On WebWork, it's going to say DNE, does not exist. Because the negative 8 inside the radical, if you plug that in your calculator, it's going to say error, unreal number. So we call that not real when we take the square root of a negative. I know you had sent me one of those like that on WebWork. Okay? All right, so we can't really go much further with this because basically what this is saying is that we don't we don't have a solution actually. Okay, well, we don't have a real solution. Later on we'll get to imaginary numbers and then we'll have an imaginary solution. Won't that be fun? Okay, so here, in order to get this into standard form, what am I going to need to do to get this into standard form? I'm going to have to FOIL, right? And, the question came up before, should I distribute the 2? You could distribute the 2, but don't distribute it to both. You would only want to distribute to one of them. So I think it's easier if you just FOIL first. So FOIL, 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 FOIL. So we get 2 times x squared. Oh, actually, sorry, that's 3x squared. Minus x plus 3x minus 1 equals 1. Is that right? Okay, now we're going to distribute that 2 into everything. Actually, we could simplify first. Why don't we do that? We'll simplify first. 3x squared. Simplify, I mean add those two together. So that's plus 2x minus 1 equals 1. And now I'll distribute the 2. So distributing the 2 to everything, I get 6x squared plus 4x minus 2 equals 1. What else do I need to do to get it ready to use the quadratic formula? So minus 1, 6x squared plus 4x minus 3 equals 0. Tell me your A, your B, and your C. 6, 4, negative 3. X, I'm just going to write the quadratic formula up here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so every time you write it, you're getting one step closer to memorizing it. All right, so now we're going to plug these things in. Negative b is going to be negative 4 plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16 minus 4a, 6, c, negative 3, all over 2 times 6, right? Negative 4, getting ahead of myself. Negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. What's this whole thing? Yeah, plus, what did you say it was, 72? Over 12. Okay, and moving right along, equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root. What does that add up to? 88 over 12. Are you guys looking at your old notes too to see if I'm getting the same answers? Okay, good. And can we simplify radical 88? What would it simplify to? 4 times 22. And 22 is just 2 times 11, right? So that doesn't do much for us. Okay, so here, now we're working on simplify. Simplify. Negative 4 plus or minus, we said this is the same thing as 4 times 22. 2 is just 2 times 11, so that doesn't help us. Why are we taking that 4? What are we going to do with that 4? We're taking the square root of it. So we have negative 4 plus or minus, what does it come out as? 2 square root of 22 over 12. Now, if we're going to simplify this any further, we're going to want to look and see, is there a number that goes into, it has to go into all of these, okay? 2 goes into each one. So 2 goes in here, negative 2 plus or minus 2 goes in here once. 2 goes in here 6 times. So that would be your most simplified answer, okay? All right. I'm not going to talk about checking on this one, but you could also check. So your solution set, negative 2 plus or minus square root of 22 over 6. And I would suggest using a calculator to check that. So I can help you with that individually if you want to see that. Does anybody want to see that right now, how to check it? Do you know how to check it on your calculator? Okay, can I use yours? No, this one's slightly different because I have that other one is like packed away someplace. Okay, so the way we would check it on this calculator, this one is a little different calculator here. I would take each one. Now you have to separate the plus and minus. So I would go negative, there's 2 ways I could do it. Negative 2, I'm going to just use the negative one, minus square root of 22, close the parentheses. If I go enter and then divide by 6, okay, So that one right there with the negative is approximately negative 1.1. Negative 1.1. If I plug that in, it's not going to give me the exact right answer, right? I would have to plug it in using ANS. Because this decimal goes on for infinity, I'll use the ANS button. So 2, now I'm going to plug it in. 2 times second answer, that's taking the last answer, plus 1, times 3 times second answer, minus 1. And when I push enter, what number do you expect to get here? 1. Ah, 1. Okay, another way I could put it in for the positive one, I could do parentheses. If you want to do it all in one step, you have to use parentheses around the whole thing. So this goes like this. Parentheses negative 2 plus the square root of 22, close that parentheses, close the numerator parentheses. Divide by 6, okay? That answer is approximately 0.45 if I round it, okay? Well, I rounded that one to 2 decimal places. I should be consistent. Okay, now to plug that in, I go 2 parentheses, second answer. Did I do it? No. Yep, answer, plus 1, close parentheses, 3 times second answer, minus 1, minus 1, close the parentheses. Okay, now I push enter. Oops, I pushed enter twice. But when I pushed enter once, okay, it's all messed up now. But when I pushed the answer first time, it was 1. Okay. All right, let's go on to the next one. This is getting to be a really long video. Those are group work. You can try that. Talking about the pros and cons. Okay, so there's 3 different ways to solve quadratics. There's factoring. There's the square root method. And there's the quadratic formula. Okay, so let's think about some pros and cons. What is a pro of factoring? Yeah, so hopefully if we have enough practice, it could be easy with practice. What is a con of using factoring? Well, not all are factorable. Okay, the square root method, it only works if we can isolate, oh look, I spelled it right that time, isolate the square term, okay, or the perfect square, we should say, perfect square. So that's a pro and a con. It can be easy if you can isolate the squared term, but if you can't, then you can't use it. A pro of using the quadratic formula is it will always work. But what would be a con? It's tedious. Yes, I would agree with you that it is tedious. Okay, and because it's tedious, you can make mistakes. Can make mistakes. I see a lot of mistakes when people can factor and they choose sometimes to use the quadratic formula instead of factoring. That's when I see the most mistakes, because there were so many steps involved that maybe they got caught up one place when they could have easily factored it. So that's why, if you solve these quadratic equations using any method of your choice, I would suggest first try and factor it if you can. If it feels too hard to factor, now what would you need to do to solve this one? You would need to first, you would have to get everything over to one side. So I subtract 4x, I subtract 4. I want to first set it equal to 0. So that's number 1, is setting it equal to 0. And then number 2 would be, could I use the AC method? So this one is not as easily done, as the other factoring. But we want a number that two numbers that multiply to negative 12 that have a sum of negative 4. Why negative 12? Where did I get negative 12 from? Yes, 3 times negative 4 gives us the negative 12. So can you think of two numbers? Negative 6 and 2. Wonderful. So we break it up. 3x squared minus 6x plus 2x minus 4 equals 0. So I just used those two factors to break up the middle. And then we're going to factor by grouping. So 3x comes out, leaving x minus 2. Positive 2 comes out, leaving x minus 2. We get 3x plus 2 times x minus 3 equals 0 equals 0. And so x will equal 3. And here, 3x plus 2 equals 0. If we solve that one for 0, we get x equals negative 2/3. So negative 2/3, comma, 3 are our solutions. And of course, you will want to check both, okay? Because I'm making this video way too long already. I'm just going to skip the check, but I'm going to remind you to make sure that you do it so you can make sure it's correct. Here on this one, what method would you choose for this second problem? I would choose the square root property because I can isolate that x squared. So I'm going to divide by 3. I get x squared equals 150. Now the easiest thing I can do to get x by itself is to take the square root. X equals plus or minus the square root of 150. Can we simplify radical 150? Yes, we can. So 150 has 25, I know, is a perfect square, 25 times 6. So x equals plus or minus square root of 25 times 6. Square root of 25 is, yep, 5 radical 6. This would be our solution. Here is negative 5 times radical 6, and here is 5 times radical 6. Sometimes I've been keeping them together in plus or minus, but I'm just separating them so you know they're both. Okay, let me just show you what the positive or negative check would look like. So the check would be like this: 3 times negative 5 times radical 6 squared equals 450. If I square a negative, I get a positive. Square 5, that's 25. Square the square root of 6 is 6. So that's 3 times 150 again, right? 25 times 6. That was working our way backwards.